Denton, something that strikes me about what you were describing in this command is the obedience component. And it made me think of Numbers 13 and 14, which is what we base the Promised Land Living curriculum on. You have these 12 spies who are so brave. If you study the map of where they were in the Negev region and how they moved deep into the Promised Land to spy out that land, they were obedient. They followed God's command, and they spied out the land. They reported back on the land. They brought back fruit from the land, and then everything began to break down. Joshua and Caleb had one response, and the other 10 had a different response. Joshua and Caleb were ready to take the next step of obedience. It's not just one step, it's an ongoing work of learning how to walk in obedience. But the 10 were so petrified that they were ready to actually kill Joshua and Caleb rather than step into the land. Denton, what happened? What causes this?
To begin with, I really think it's the default position of mankind to always want an explanation, clarity, whatever, instead of just simply obeying. And so we, we look here at Joshua 24:15, where you see Joshua's response to God's initiative in his life. And he acknowledges, he says, and if it is disagreeable in your sight to serve the Lord, hey guys, after all you've seen, you turn him down. Choose for yourselves today whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served, which were beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you're living. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. When God says something, I don't think we ever learn it completely, but he means it. Lots of things going on in our day. You can, you look at the source and you say, well, they don't mean it, and you move on. But we begin to realize God, when he says something, it's exactly what he means. And he is dependable. He can be trusted to complete whatever he says. So God invites us to walk with him in the same way as Abraham and these other guys. And it's a cooperative relationship. He chooses to walk with us, not for us to just follow him. He takes our hand, he walks with us, and he gives us the opportunity to pray and to seek clarification and to be able to identify as we walk with him. So we got to ask the question, are we living life through the eyes of the flesh or through the eyes of faith? It's a choice that we have every 30 seconds in our lives. So to truly understand this whole journey, I think we have to go back to the Garden of Eden and look at Adam and Eve living in very much like the Promised Land. Everything was provided for them. They were simply told to tend the garden and whatever. But God was providing everything for them, and they were experiencing every day the presence of God. He was coming and walking in the cool of the evening with them, and yet they chose not to follow God, but instead to take control. And God says, when you eat of this tree of good and evil, you're going to die. A part of you is going to be gone. And yet, God didn't give up at that point. He loved them. He loved them through the whole thing. And we don't have time to dig into that. But there were specific ways that God began to show his love even in their disobedience.
And in the garden, it wasn't Adam who pursued God, it was God who pursued Adam. As a matter of fact, the first recorded question of God is, where are you, Adam? He was looking for him.
And the interesting thing, Cheryl, is God knew where he was.
That question was for Adam's sake.
And that's true in our lives. Many times God asks us, not because he doesn't know, but he wants us to acknowledge it. And you see a sovereign God even through our choices, even when the choices are not what we knew we were supposed to do or anybody else did. And God loves us enough, and this blows your mind. God loves us enough to give us free will. I don't think I've ever made anything or whatever that I didn't want to make sure I could control it. You know, and yet God says, no, I'm giving you free will. He gave them a choice. And they made the selfish choice, and yet look at what God has done with it. And he even in the middle of that, he still wanted a relationship with them. And you begin to realize that our response, Adam and Eve's response, was really the seeds of the beginning of religion. Man's attempt to be like God without God. And we see
Wow.
that continuing on in our lives.
That's powerful. Oh my goodness. Man's attempt to be like God without God. I could spend a lot of time thinking about that. That wasn't part of our script, Denton.
No.
So he made it possible for us to decide for ourselves. He loved us enough to allow us to choose. And when you read that passage on Joshua, of course, that passage comes after the Israelites return and go into the promised land with the second generation. But he had set his heart on following God. And that's what we have to decide. We have to decide, do we want to set our heart on following God? And like you said, we're going to stumble. We're going to fall. A righteous man stumbles 7 times, but he gets up. So this is not about perfection, which we're going to find out more. It's not about performance. We're going to find out more about that later. But it is about a desire to choose obedience in what we're doing. And that is our love response to that love relationship with the Lord. Well, thank you, Denton, for this third segment, where we were focusing on our response and the different choices that we have. In the next segment, we're going to look at the result of obedience. And we'll see you in a minute.